I know what you're thinking. I thought we gave him up for Lent. Well, this is the one Sunday in Lent that I get to preach here, which is great. It's good to be home. I found a book that I'm trying to get you all to purchase and read with me. It's called This Is Your Brain on Music. That's what I thought. Here's just a little bit from the back cover. It's about how composers exploit the way our brains make sense of the world. Why we emotionally attach to the music we listen to as teenagers. Why 10,000 hours of practice, not talent, makes virtuosos. How insidious jingles, otherwise known as earworms, get stuck in our heads. I think this will be fascinating. We're going to get together on Tuesday evening, April 5th, to talk about it, so you've got just over a month. We have purchased a small quantity that we'll be able to sell from here, so let us know if you'd rather buy it from us. And we're selling them at cost, by the way. Open up Larry's bookstore. It's not a bad idea, actually. So for Lent, we 5 preachers are talking about the questions that we're struggling with. Admitting that everyone has questions. Sometimes completely unanswerable. The one I've chosen is on our image of God. I have to wonder if it isn't time for us to change the way we think about God. So many years ago, I was probably 8 or 9. I attended with my family a worship service where they passed out a bulletin with a picture of God on the cover. Wow. And I cannot find this picture anywhere to show it to you. That's not it. Oh, that's not bad. But I can't find it anywhere, but it is indelibly etched on my mind. This picture of God, it showed a big guy. He had a long gray beard and long fingers and long fingernails. And he was seated on a big throne. And you could see that this throne was up in the sky. And in front of him was an easel with this big book sitting on it. And he had a pen in his hand. And it was clear that this God was up there keeping track of something. And this God was pretty scary looking. Now, what I find interesting is that more than 50 years later, I can remember every detail of that picture. And that's the image that most people seem to have in their mind of God. They picture this guy up in the sky, and what do we call him? The man upstairs. They picture this guy who makes the team with the most righteous players win the football game. This God makes hurricanes strike the East Coast because of so many gay people being there. This is the God who has blessed the United States with abundance because of our righteousness. This is the God before whom we will all appear and be told where we're going to go spend all eternity. That's the picture that most of us have of God. And I think that we're finding out that by and large that image of God doesn't make any sense. When we look at the world, that God doesn't make any sense. That God somehow seems so small, so insignificant as to be unworthy of our attention. Marcus Borg used to tell the story that when he was teaching religion at Oregon State University, that students would often come up to him and say, "Dr. Borg, I just can't believe in God anymore." And Marcus would say, "So tell me what kind of God it is that you don't believe in." And that's the God they would describe. The big guy up in the sky, always ready to smite somebody. And Marcus would reply, "You know what? I don't believe in that God either. And you know what? I don't believe in that God either." We have a choice. We can redraw God. We can reimagine God. Now, I understand that God is beyond our understanding. God's beyond our words. We're not going to wrap our minds around God no matter what picture we draw. But we've got to imagine God somehow. We've got to use some words somehow. Now, back to that picture of that elephant. That's part of an old Sufi story. Once upon a time, there lived 6 blind men in a village. And one day the villagers told them, "Hey, there's an elephant in the village today." They had no idea what an elephant was. They decided that even though we would not be able to see it, let's go and feel it anyway. All of them went where the elephant was. Every one of them touched the elephant. "Hey, the elephant's like a pillar," said the first man who touched the leg. "Oh, no. It's like a rope," said the second man who touched the tail. "Oh, no, it's like a thick branch of a tree," said the third man who touched the trunk. "It's like a big hand fan," said the fourth man who touched the ear. "It's like a huge wall," said the fifth man who touched the belly. "It's like a solid pipe," said the sixth man who touched the tusk. And they began to argue, every one of them insisting that their understanding of the elephant was the right one, when a wise man walked up and said, "So what's the problem?" And they all explained that they had all touched the elephant and come away with a different understanding. And he said, "Yes, because you all touched a different part of the elephant." I have to wonder if it isn't time for us to touch a different part of the elephant, to develop a new image of God, to imagine God differently. For the last 1,000 years or so, we Christians have thought that we've had a hold of a God who was judgmental and angry and to be feared. There may be more to God than that. There may be much more to God than that. In fact, that picture of God simply doesn't work anymore. I recently heard an interview with John Cobb, one of the world's preeminent theologians, who offered, he said, I wish that people could trust their own experience more. Well, what he was saying was that it seems to him that there are many Christians who seem to believe one thing out there and another thing in here. What he says is we ought to go outside and trust our experience of the world to reveal God to us. When you look at the world, Do you believe that people get what they deserve? Am I the only person who has noticed that Las Vegas has not yet sunk into the sand? If God were going to strike someplace, wouldn't it be there? No, the world doesn't work that way. 38,000 people starve to death every day, most of them children. Does that make any sense at all? Is there any kind of image of God that can make sense of why that would happen? And wars, and cancers, and earthquakes. When you and I look at the world, does it look like everything's working according to some kind of divine plan? It looks to me like things just happen. That God's present, but that things just happen. And speaking of experience, I'm a big fan of Abraham Joshua Heschel. Rabbi, died in the 70s. Who wrote this? God is not always silent, and man is not always blind. In every man's life, excuse the sexist language, this was written back in the 50s, I think. In every man's life, there are moments when there is a lifting of the veil at the horizon of the known, opening a sight of the eternal. Each of us has at least once in his life experienced the momentous reality of God. Each of us has once caught a glimpse of the beauty, peace, and power that flow through the souls of those who are devoted to him. But such experiences are rare events. To some people, they're like shooting stars, passing and unremembered. In others, they kindle a light that's never quenched. The remembrance of that experience and the loyalty to the response of that moment are the forces that sustain our faith. That is so beautifully written. He was the most amazing writer. But you know what he's saying? If you have experienced awe and wonder, you have experienced God. If you've ever had a sense that there was something beyond what you could see and touch, that was an experience of God. And did you catch his point that we've all been there? That we've all experienced that God. And not a God to be afraid of. Heschel sounds very much like Psalm 8. When I look at the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you've established, what are human beings that you're mindful of them? Mortals that you care for them. Yet you've made them a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. That psalmist, I believe, was having that moment of experiencing God. And what about the prologue to the Gospel of John? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That experience of God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What's come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. We all have our own experience of the divine. And what does that experience tell us? And then there's the matter of Jesus. It's really interesting to me that people seem to like Jesus a lot more than God. Jesus, we seem to think, was a really nice guy who walked around carrying lambs a lot. And yet God is to be feared. We keep forgetting that Jesus came to show us what God looks like. God so loved the world that he sent his... We keep forgetting that Jesus never claimed to be more than a mirror of the nature of God. Jesus is the divine written in human flesh. We keep forgetting that to know Jesus is to know God. Jesus, the one who told the story of the prodigal son, or actually, it's about the ever-loving Father who always welcomes, who always hopes, who always forgives, who always loves, even without being asked. Jesus was the one who would not condemn the woman caught in adultery. Jesus is the one who went to the cross as a symbol of faithfulness to God. Could it be that that's what God looks like? Could it be that God is that kind of loving, forgiving, accepting person? Jesus. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love God with all you are. Could it be that that's God? For the last 10,000 years, humanity has believed in what's known as dualism, or Platonic dualism, which has held that there is this world, imperfect as it may be. It can never be more than a bad reflection of the world that exists up above the clouds where God is. Maybe it's time to let God come down out of the clouds. Perhaps Jesus was right. For I am with you always, he said. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of you. Could it be that God's not up there watching us, but that God's here living with us? Could it be? And then there's 1 John. Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. God's love was revealed among us in this way. God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. And this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us, and sent his Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Beloved, since God loved us so much, we ought to love one another. Isn't that beautiful? God is love. Patient, forgiving, always believing, not keeping a record of wrongs, says 1 Corinthians. God is love, which raises the most interesting possibility. And it was Brian McLaren, by the way, who once remarked, we need never underestimate our ability to be wrong. I'm not going to get God completely right. But could it be that God simply loves us? That God's here as courage and hope and faith and strength? Could it be that the point of life is not to achieve some mark with our behavior, but to learn how to accept love and to share love? Could it be that we're not cosmic accidents, but that we are the children of a loving Creator God. Could that be right? I don't know. I have questions. But I believe that I'm on to something. I believe. Of course, you know that if you can re-image God, then everything changes. Our image of God tells us who we are and how the world works. If we accept that God isn't to be feared, that God is not judgmental, that God is not vindictive, that God is not punishing, then it changes who we are and what the world is. I think I'm on to something. I hope I'm right. I have questions. God, we all have questions. There are none of us who understand you completely, who can wrap our minds around what you're doing in the world. None of us. But help us, God, to grab hold of that love and hang on. In the name of Christ. Amen.